All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Scott here again. Chapter 4, Lesson 1, the Colonial Economy. We're just going to run through this tonight real quick. Like I said before, it's not going to be the full PowerPoint or the full presentation. But what I want to do is do my best to kind of give you the overview of it all, so you'll be able to look back on this when you're studying for a test or if you're in one of the other classes and just want a quick review. So, let's get started. Today we're going to compare and contrast the day-to-day of what was life like for them. You know, what was it like for the men and the women, the children? We're going to touch on that a little bit. Plus, we're going to talk about the origins of the development of slavery in the colonies and the resistance to it, and also the Middle Passage. Let's see here. Real quick, of course, you have your 13 colonies here. They are divided into New England, the Middle Colonies, and the Southern Colonies, and what is known as the back country. Now, all along the Appalachian Mountain chain right here, pretty much divided what they considered the colonies and then the back country itself. Now, the central question I want you to think about as we go through this: how does geography influence the way people live? Now, up north, of course, the soil was not very good. It was rocky, it was sandy. The terrain was not conducive for large amounts of farming, or not on the scale that the South was. So they focused a lot on industry and cattle. You'll see some cattle, you see a lot of lumbering, shipbuilding, shipping, fishing, whaling. We'll get into that a little bit more. New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, which is our middle colonies, you do see a lot more grain. You see a lot of grain being produced there, a lot of cattle. And of course, the southern colonies is the agricultural base of the colony, so to say, where you have rice, you have indigo, you do have some grains, but they are focusing mostly on the rice, the indigo, and of course tobacco. Don't forget that one. Now, why it all matters? Because the unique resources and conditions that existed in each colony helped shape the colonial economies and the way of living. Where they lived, what the land was like, allowed you to see what it was they did there. Farming in the south, more industry in the north. And this division starts now, and we'll go on to the Civil War. And by the time we get to the Civil War, you'll see the north highly industrialized in comparison to the south, which stays with agriculture. Now, how did the economic activity of the three regions reflect on the geography? Once again, we've talked about that. What was the soil like? They couldn't farm that well up in the north. They focused more on shipbuilding, other forms of industry. In the middle, and especially the southern colonies, were more agriculturally based. Once again, just an overview. If you want to pause it for a second, take a look at it. You can see the different economy, the geography, the cultures of the three different regions. New England, mainly English. The middle colonies were English, German, Scotch, Irish, and Dutch. And the southern colonies were, of course, English, German, Scotch, Irish, Scots, and African. Forgive me if the screen's shaking a little bit or it's loud in the background. We've got some thunderstorms tonight. Now, once again, just another display showing you the differences between the regions and how they varied, from long winters in New England to nearly year-round growing seasons in the south, rocky soil all the way down to the fertile soil in the south. They had a diverse economy. They did have small farms, but they had fishing and trade in New England. And in the south, it was the plantation economy. Once again, just your divisions, and it's showing you the settlements. Who was there? Now you'll see right here something to key on right here is the African settlements, or settlers, which mainly were slaves at this time period. You'll see them throughout Virginia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, and a little bit in Maryland. This is mainly the slave population that you have here. Very few Africans were here in America, or what will be America, that were free. They were enslaved. Just another diagram. Now, also, as we talk more about the differences in the lifestyles of the colonies, and you can compare it to Britain, or to England, and to Ireland, to Europe, notice here, in this right here, this is just showing the different churches that you would have found in England. Everywhere from Roman Catholics, Lutherans, in the purple, Calvinists, and then Anglicans right here. And you will see that England is purely Anglican. Thus the Church of England, why people were wanting to get out and get away. Now, the commercial New England. These economies in New England, the New England colonies focused on shipbuilding, fishing, and trade. Between 1706 and 1775, almost 1 million people came to these colonies. Farmers in New England practiced subsistence farming and relied on their children for labor, producing enough food to meet their needs. There was not a lot of land. Again, there wasn't enough land to do the plantation-style farms that you find in the South. Families were able to grow just enough to feed themselves. This is the term subsistence farming. If they did have any extra, they were able to take it and sell it, but generally the goal was to make enough for their families. Now, important means of commerce in New England included these three things right here: shipbuilding, small businesses, and fishing. Shipbuilding is something we're going to key on here in a little bit when we talk about the different industry. Now, northern coastal cities were the center of the shipping trade. Just a few diagrams here. Artist renderings of what the port towns look like. Shipbuilders here, and just a blow up of the map again, where you do see the different industries that were throughout the New England colonies. Now, most New Englanders lived in towns. Each town had a meeting house facing a green or a common where the cows grazed and the army trained. Looking here at the map, you'll see very similar to the way we set up properties now. They did have a small piece of land, enough for their subsistence farming, but they were side by side all the way through here. And you would have the common area somewhere within the region. And once again, that's where the army would train. It's where they would have meetings. A lot of times it's where they would have church services in the meeting houses. Now, we talk of industry in New England. And one industry can spur another one. And that's one thing I want you guys to focus on today when you're listening to this. The growing fishing industry. Well, they wanted to fish. Somebody got the idea, hey, I want to open up my own fishing industry. But one thing I'm going to need if I'm going to open up a fishing business is ships. So I'm going to have to get some shipbuilders in there. So here's a whole new industry of people building ships. But then if I'm going to build ships, I've got to have lumber. So I'm going to have a whole other industry pop up of people cutting the lumber, cutting the trees, cutting it into lumber. We've got people building ships. We've got people making sails for the ships. Keep in mind, they did not have engines on these ships. Not like the big diesel engines we have today. They had sails. That's how they made it around. So you have a whole other industry pop up of sail makers. Well, then you've got different little metal pieces. You're going to need metal workers. And once I get the ships going, I've got to have something to store the fish in and to be able to ship them off and salt them in. Thus the barrel making comes into play. Now, I'm not going to just get a load of wood and start building ships. If I don't know what I'm doing, the ship isn't going to float. So a lot of times what I would do in this instance is I would become an apprentice. I'd be a person who learned the trade or craft from a master crafts worker. So I will go in, I will learn how it's done under the supervision of somebody that knows what they're doing. And after a while, when I'm confident enough to go out on my own, I will. A lot of jobs today are like that. Take electricians. You have to be an apprentice electrician before you can be a fully licensed electrician. They want you to know what you're doing before you go out and start messing with stuff. Population in New England, in the New England colonies. You'll see the white population pretty much skyrocket. You'll see the Native American population dwindle down as lands are being, as the colonies are expanding. They're expanding into the Native American lands, which pushes them out in a way. And also the black population. You see it low the whole time. Now it does rise a bit, but for the most part it is going to stay low. Now I'm going to ask you, why does it stay low? And I hope you're sitting at home saying, Mr. Scott, that's easy. They didn't have slavery in the North. It was legal, yes, but slavery was mainly used for plantations. So down south is where you would have found the larger numbers of slaves. The Salem witch trial, we talked about that in class. We'll cover that a little bit later. The middle colonies, of course, are New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. This map here is just showing you once again where the colonies are and the different things that they had there. They had the cattle, the fishing, the grain, the iron, the lumber, and the rum being produced in these regions. Once again, Pennsylvania, parts of New York were great for grains, producing grains, wheat, corn, and cattle. Now, the middle colonies depended upon the sale of cash crops, such as wheat and corn, as I just said. New York and Pennsylvania farmers grew large quantities of wheat and other cash crops. Wow. The middle colonies also had industries ranging from home-based crafts to large businesses, so from candle making to bigger companies, so to say. Now, nearly 100,000 German immigrants came into America in the colonial era, and most settled in Pennsylvania. It stayed there. A lot of the Amish are an offshoot today. The Amish today are an offshoot of the German colonies. The southern colonies, I know we're speeding through it, but hang in there. Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland. Now here's where you're starting to see the cash crops grow up. The indigo, the tobacco, the rice. Indigo was important because they discovered it was really good for dyeing clothes. They didn't have the technology that we have today, of course, in order to print colors and stuff like that. So indigo became a very big deal. Also, they had cattle. You had some grain, but once again, focus on the cash crops in the area, because when I showed you the map of where the African population was, it was all in these regions right here. And it's all different tobacco farms and rice farms. Slavery played a big role in the economy and success of the southern colonies. Most settlers in the southern colonies made their living from farming, and a little commerce popped up, but not much. It stays agricultural throughout history up until the Civil War. Tobacco was the principal cash crop of Maryland and Virginia. I know when we get to the Civil War, we talk a lot about cotton, but at this time period, tobacco is the key. So if you get a test and saying what were the cash crops, tobacco and rice were the way to go in colonial times. And sometimes a surplus of tobacco on the market would cause prices to rise and fall. That was a discussion we had in class. Nothing really to worry about in this presentation. Now, life in the southern colonies, the main cash crop in Georgia was rice. You see the depiction of them working in the rice fields there. Most large plantations were located in tidewater regions. This was a place of flat, low-lying plains along the seacoast. So all your rice fields, of course, are flat. They build levees and dikes around them, and when the tide would come in, it would force the freshwater rivers to rise. Another big one. It would force them to rise, and then they could flood the fields this way. West of the tidewater region lay the hills and forests, and climbing up towards the Appalachian Mountains, known as the backcountry, where settlers grew corn, tobacco, on smaller farms. Now, your guiding question to think about this one: why were enslaved Africans brought to the colonies? Once again, we've talked about it multiple times. 1619, 20 Africans came to Jamestown. They were sold to Virginia planters to work in the tobacco fields. They may have come as servants and not slaves. My take on it, if you're getting off a boat and you're being sold to someone, you are a slave. Not a servant, but a slave. Now, cause that affected the slave trade: colonists needed to grow cash crops. Think of it this way. If I'm a farmer and I have 100 acres and I'm planting tobacco and I successfully grow the tobacco, I sell it, I have this wad of cash right here, and I say to myself, next year I'm going to grow 200 acres of tobacco. Well, I'm going to need double the workforce. And it's not that other colonists wouldn't work, it's just that the population wasn't big enough. So people would go and get slaves, purchase the slaves to have on the plantations to work. Now, European need for tobacco and rice increases. Of course, they're going to plant more. Growing tobacco and rice requires a large labor force. So the effect of all these causes right here is that Africans are robbed of basic human rights. Populations of enslaved Africans grow, and slavery creates feelings of unjust and plants seeds of regional conflict. Now, slavery was legal throughout the 13 colonies at this point. It was looked down upon, especially by the Quakers in Pennsylvania, who do not believe in slavery, and there wasn't the need up north, so they kind of looked down upon the larger plantations in the South. Now, the Middle Passage is something else we've talked about. You need to remember, colonial merchant ships went directly to England and back. Some of them did, and some followed what was called the triangular trade. Now, with the arrival of Europeans in West Africa, enslaved Africans began to be shipped to America in exchange for goods. And I'll show you what I mean by that. The raw goods, the rice, the tobacco, the indigo, the furs, would be shipped from the colonies up to Britain. And then from Britain, they'd come back down. Sometimes they'd stop over here in Africa. So let's do the animation here, make it look fancy. There you go. You know what? I don't like that one. Let's talk about it. Rice, tobacco, indigo, fur would go to Britain. Then they'd come down here. They trade goods for slaves, and then the slaves would come along what is known as the Middle Passage, right here, back to the colonies. So you had a triangle of it, where they would go back and forth. Raw goods, finished goods, and slaves will come back. There you go. And once again, they would come along, the slaves were brought back to the colonies along what is called the Middle Passage. I suggest you remember that one. We'll give you the wink right here. Remember that. Now, the life of a slave, the large plantation owners hired overseers to keep the enslaved Africans working hard. And in 1705, the colony of Virginia created the Slave Code. These are strict rules that govern the behavior and punishment of enslaved Africans and help define the relationship between enslaved people and free people. Now, in your notes, I had you write these down. They were forbidden to gather in groups of more than 3. Some people don't understand that, but if you really think about it, if I have a plantation full of slaves and all of a sudden I'm letting them all come together and they're unhappy, then there's the chance that they are going to revolt. They're going to rebel. They couldn't leave the owner's land without a written pass. That way they could keep track, make sure a slave was not a runaway or a fugitive slave. They weren't allowed to own guns. I don't even have to explain that one, because if you get a group of slaves together, a large group, and they have guns, they're going to put 2 and 2 together, and they're not going to be slaves for much longer. And it was a crime for slaves to learn how to read and write, and they did not have the right to testify in court. So if something was done to them, or harm was brought upon them or another slave, they didn't have the right to testify for that. So these codes right here, enacted in 1705, are part of the reason that by the Civil War, some areas had double the slaves, that they had free people, and they didn't revolt. Part of that was because of the not allowing them to be educated, not allowing them to learn to read and write. As we will talk about in class in the future, when we have the Great Awakening, it's because people are learning to read, and they're starting to get their own ideas, and they can express it themselves, they can research it. This really hindered the slaves. Real quick, the enslaved Africans developed a culture that drew on languages, customs, traditions of their homelands in West Africa, and some colonists did not believe in owning slaves. However, slavery did play an important role in the economic success of the southern colonies. Pop quiz hot shot. Where at, in the middle colonies especially, did they not agree with slavery? And I'm hoping right now you're saying, well, that's Pennsylvania, the Quakers, William Penn. Correct. All right, critics of slavery, not all colonists believed in it. Many Puritans, for example, refused to hold enslaved people. In Pennsylvania, Quakers and Mennonites condemned slavery. Eventually, the debate over slavery would spark a bloody war between the North and South. We're jumping ahead a little bit. We've got a Revolutionary War and a War of 1812 to fight before we get there. A couple things here, just showing the numbers of slaves that were taken captive and distributed throughout the world. It's such a bad thing to say. British and Americans had 427,000 brought to the colonies. The West Indies, over 4 million. Brazil, over 3.6 million. That's just something to look at and consider. Once again, the chart, if you want to pause it here and look at this, it breaks down the colonies and it breaks down the differences behind them. And it helps you see the political, the geographical differences, the economical, and even cultural differences. All right, guys, I hope that helped. Once again, any questions, feel free to come by class, talk to me, shoot me an email, talk to your teacher if you're not on the grade team. I hope it helped. Watch through it. Have a great day.